Hi, everyone.
Hi again. Ray Franz in Crisis of Conscience in the chapter Credentials and Cause has just been talking about the impact that J.F. Rutherford's talk and booklet, Face the Facts, had in 1938 when he was 16 years old. It governed his life course and choices for the next two generations.
Mm-hmm.
But of course at the time they didn't think it was going to be two generations. They thought time was fast running out, and that was one of the facts you had to face.
Yeah.
So he goes on about what happened after that assembly. He says, in 1939 I was baptized, and in June 1940, on graduating from high school, I immediately entered full-time service in witnessing activity. So he'd be 18 here. That year was a turbulent one for the world and for Jehovah's Witnesses. World War II was underway. The work of Jehovah's Witnesses came under ban in several countries, and hundreds of witnesses were in prison. In the United States, children of Jehovah's Witnesses were being expelled from school for refusal to salute the flag, which was viewed as a form of image worship. The witnesses' stand on neutrality toward war often inspired violent antagonism on the part of those priding themselves on their loyalty and patriotism. Vicious mob attacks were starting to spread. That summer, our family went to Detroit, Michigan to attend a major witness convention. A spirit of tense anticipation prevailed, a sense of being under siege. At the close of the assembly, Judge Rutherford indicated that, quote, this might be the last assembly we would have before the Great Tribulation struck, end of quote. When the autumn of 1940 came and I put my summer clothes away, I remember thinking that I would likely never take them out again, that either Armageddon would have come or we would by then all be in concentration camps like many witnesses in Nazi Germany.
Mob violence reached a crescendo during the early 1940s. In Connersville, Indiana, I attended a trial of two women witnesses charged with seditious activity, riotous conspiracy, simply because they studied Watchtower publications as part of a home study group. The trial ran 5 days, and on the last day, after night had fallen, the jury brought in its verdict of guilty. On leaving the courtroom, the defense attorney, a witness named Victor Schmidt, and his wife were violently assaulted by a mob and were forced to walk in a driving rain the entire distance to the city limits. On the way, the horror of the situation caused Schmidt's wife suddenly to begin to menstruate. I had in my car a witness representative, Jack Rainbow, who had earlier been threatened with death by some of these men if he returned to their city. On arriving at the city limits and seeing Schmidt and his wife, followed by a remnant of the mob, I felt obliged to take the risk of picking them up, and was able to do so. Another witness had attempted this, but only got a broken car window for his efforts. Schmidt's wife broke out into hysterical screaming when we got her into the car. Her husband's face was bruised and covered with blood from deep cuts where he had evidently been hit with brass knuckles. Horrifying.
To experience firsthand such raw and callous intolerance left a vivid impression on my young mind. I felt all the more convinced of the rightness of my course with those who were quite evidently the true servants of God. Later, as a tactic recommended by the Watchtower Society's legal counsel, Hayden Covington, a large group of 75 witnesses from the Cincinnati, Ohio area, including my parents, my two sisters and myself, traveled to Connersville in a blitzkrieg witnessing effort. With one exception, we all, men, women, and children, were arrested and wound up in various jails, being locked up for 1 week until bail could be worked out. Still in my teens, it was my first time at experiencing the feeling that comes with seeing a massive metal door swing shut, hearing the bolt shoved in place, and realizing that your freedom of movement is now taken from you.
Some months later, I was in Indianapolis, Indiana for a Superior Court hearing involving the Connersville events. My uncle, Fred Franz, a member of the Watchtower headquarters staff since 1920 and a close associate of Judge Rutherford, was also there from Brooklyn as sort of an expert witness on the Society's behalf. The local congregation asked him to speak to them one evening. During the course of his talk, he began discussing the attitude of so many that the work of witnessing was nearing its end, just about finished. To put it mildly, I was stunned to hear my uncle speak to the contrary, saying that at Brooklyn they were not expecting to close down, that anyone who wanted to send in a subscription for the Watchtower magazine needn't send it in for just 6 months. He could send it in for a full year, or for 2 years if he wanted.
The thrust of his remarks was so contrary to the comments of the Society's president at the Detroit Assembly that it seemed clear to me that my uncle was speaking on his own, not presenting some duly authorized message from the Society. I actually felt like going to him and urging caution lest his remarks get back to Brooklyn and be viewed as disloyal, as having a dissipating, undermining effect on the sense of extreme urgency that had developed. Although then in his late 40s, my uncle was a relatively young man compared to Judge Rutherford, and I found myself uncertain as to whether to accept his remarks as proper or discount them as the product of an independent, somewhat brash attitude. Leaving home that year to become the partner of a young fellow witness in the coal mining region of West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, I found myself in an area where the threat of violence was faced almost on a daily basis. Some mining camps consisted of long wooden row houses strung along the highway. At times, upon reaching the last of such a section of houses, we could look back to the point where we had begun our calls and see men and boys excitedly running about, gathering a mob.
At the Octavia J. mining camp in Kentucky, our old Model A Ford car was surrounded by a group of angry miners, and we were told to get out of there and out of the state of Kentucky, and not come back if we valued our lives. Attempts to reason only provoked greater anger. We did return a couple of months later, and before we got out, were shot at and pursued, escaping only by a ruse that led us over back roads and across a mountain until we could finally make our way home. More so than patriotic fervor, religious bigotry seemed to have been the force motivating the miners. Our disbelief of the teaching of a literal hellfire torment, causing young boys to yell out "No hellers" as we drove by, weighed almost as heavily as our stand toward war. I found that close-minded bigotry appalling then, and I was happy to be part of an organization free from such intolerance.
He'll find out differently, of course, but it'll be that by the time he's 60 years old. And, what's wrong with all of this? Well, what he doesn't say here, but he does say In Search of Christian Freedom very clearly, is a lot of this persecution is brought upon them by doing something that's quite extreme, even by Christian standards, or even by your standards, as the history of the Watchtower. Russell did not send his followers door to door. He had some colporteurs, some special agents, as it were, taking his books door to door. But there was no call for everybody to get involved in public preaching. We're here in a period of great stress for the nation. You're sending your people out deliberately, provoking the local populations.
And breaking laws. I mean, for some, it was just simply a law of Sundays,
Yeah.
not going out door to door.
Which
And
they admit.
They would break that law and then wonder why did they
Yeah.
cause a ruckus.
So, of course, we don't agree with any of this deplorable mob behavior. We're
Mhm.
not endorsing it,
Yeah.
but we are saying it explains why you get such an extreme reaction. My dad told me a story that shed some light on the crisis mentality of this World War II period. He remembers that when he was joining the army back in the early 40s,
In England.
this very
Yeah.
same time, joining the British Army,
Mm-hmm.
he remembers a man, a local man who was a Quaker and a school teacher, who refused to join the army,
Mm-hmm.
and how he was marginalized, lost his job, and he would see him occasionally on the streets walking ever more shabbily along because he was forced to be, well, he was forced and his family were forced to the margins
Yeah.
because of their convictions about war. Then you realize the Quakers' stance on that is long known, as the Mennonite stance on it. It's been around for hundreds of years.
Mm.
But many of your policies were determined by Mr. Rutherford himself, including the don't get married policy.
Yeah.
Russell was not urging that on his followers, but Rutherford was.
Yeah.
And Ray Franz is one of the victims of that policy.
And I think an experience like that would reinforce your feeling that you were with the right group. It
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
had that effect on Franz here, on
Yeah.
Ray.
Yeah. And of course, if Ray had known when he was 18 years old and started to go out in regular pioneering, if he had known then about their past, as he recounts in this book and In Search of Christian Freedom, would he have made these decisions?
Yeah.
Because you and I wouldn't, in the 1970s, have made the same determinations
set
if
of
we had known their
decisions.
past.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our link, therefore, is Review the Record, which is about the history. They have said, and I think it was the 1972 Watchtower, they said, how do you know if there's a prophet among you? Well, review the record. What does it say? So
Yeah.
we did.
And then
and
we
there's-
got disfellowship.
We got this fellowship. Well, Ray got this fellowship too, so we feel in good company. Review the record. So 3 videos on that subject, and the first one we'll put on the screen. That's in the playlist, Have Jehovah's Witnesses Ever Been God's Organization?
Mhm.
See you soon.